Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this episode of Feminist Frequencies. We're here with Rob Townsend, who's the director of Humanities and which programs again?
Arts and culture.
Arts and culture programs at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And today I'm really happy that you're here with us today, Rob, because I had the good fortune of being invited by you Academy last October, which is located in Washington, D.C., in order to talk about the most recent survey that you all just published on various departments and programs in the humanities. And what I learned was really illuminating. It was great for me to have an opportunity to be in community with and have conversations with so many other people who are leading different organizations in the humanities. And so when we got the final version of the report on women's studies, gender studies, sexuality studies, I thought it would be a great idea to have you come and talk to me about what you found and what sense we're starting to try to make of what you found so that our members, especially our department chairs and program directors, but not only them, we have a lot of faculty in the National Women's Studies Association who would be interested in this data, but giving them an opportunity, us an opportunity to think about how we can make sense of this data, but also maybe leverage it to do the kinds of things that we want to do, whether that's galvanizing resources, um, just all kinds of different things that I could think of. And I'm a data girl. I always say, in the tradition of Ida B. Wells Barnett, I love a quantitative data analysis, even though we can all recognize the limitations with any kind of analysis. So I'm thankful that you're here. We discussed you sort of doing an overview of the survey, some key points, and then you and I will dialogue a little bit about what's in there, drill down on a couple points. You all should know that we're going to make the report available to all of you so that you have it in its entirety, and there will be contact information in the report for those of you who have additional questions, comments, and concerns, and things of that nature. Sound about right, Rob?
That's right. I'll love to hear from
Okay.
folks, and everything we do is for sharing.
Everything we do is for sharing. We love to hear that here at WSA. We love a good share. All right. So you've got sharing capabilities, I know. So you pop that presentation up here and let us know what you found out about us. But this is also gonna start a little bit with you talking about, the
Yeah.
that's the work that you do and how this survey came about.
Yeah. So I should say, so this is the fourth time we've done these surveys of humanities departments. And over time, I mean, we first did the first one back in 2007. And we've done them at 5-year intervals ever since. And so this is the first survey that we've done. And over time, we've added more disciplines to the survey. We started with just kind of the core language, religion, history when we did the first survey. With the one we did 5 years ago, we added women and gender studies, women, gender, and sexuality studies, race and ethnic studies, American studies, and anthropology, because we wanted to have some sort of humanities adjacent social sciences and social sciences that are humanities adjacent, sort of to expand our perspective on these questions. And
And
so this is,
us interdisciplinary folks made
that's
it
right.
in.
Yeah. No, and so and I think it's added an additional kind of richness and dimension to the survey that had traditionally focused just narrowly on the kind of the older traditional stuffier, shall we say,
Yeah.
humanities disciplines. And
Yeah.
so this was our opportunity to basically do our first follow up post pandemic to try
Right.
and capture some of the changes. And so with this one, we added a few more questions related to kind of the conditions that we're experiencing now. But it's probably important to say that we closed it last June, in June of
Right.
2024. So a couple of the data points, I think, should be read from that perspective because they were troubling then. And I think post-election
Yeah.
2024, there are, I think, speak to the larger challenges that disciplines such as yours are facing. So just to
Absolutely.
Yeah. So just to provide some context, we start basically the sample frame for this comes from IPEDS, which is the Department of Education's data source that lets us track every single degree that's awarded in different disciplines. And so to build the women and gender studies and sexuality studies category, we looked at every institution that awarded a degree in either the two categories they have are women's studies and gay and lesbian studies, I think. So and so we started with that, looking at all those institutions, and then we on the staff just went through every one of those institutions and found every department that would fit under women, gender, sexuality studies of any sort, and we included them in the sample for the survey. An important element to this, just to be aware of, is that you can see that that over the time that we've been doing these surveys, women, gender, and sexuality studies, that category has seen a downturn in terms of the number of degrees being awarded. It's down about 40% in terms of the number of bachelor's degrees, while the number of master's and doctoral degrees has been, master's degrees, it's been more flat. Doctoral degrees actually had the highest number of degrees ever awarded in 2023, and which is rare among the
Yeah.
different disciplines that
Yeah.
I'm looking at. The decline in bachelor's degrees is comparable to a lot of the other humanities
Right.
disciplines that we've looked at. But when I looked at the number of institutions that are awarding these degrees, you can see
Yeah.
women and gender studies has been on a long upward trajectory in terms of the number of institutions that are awarding degrees since the earliest data point we have for them is 1997.
Right.
And you can see they kind of peaked in terms of the number of institutions
Hmm.
that were awarding those degrees in 2018, and they come down just a bit since then. I think it's about 5% in terms of the total number of institutions that were awarding degrees. They're not awarding degrees now. We don't know whether that means they closed a major down, they
Right.
eliminated a department, but that's just gives us one kind of data point in terms of looking at it. And as you can see, they've now surpassed race and ethnic studies and American studies in terms of the number of institutions awarding degrees in those disciplines. So it's an interesting kind of trend
Yeah, for
line
sure. Hmm.
to be aware of. Um,
Yeah.
the and one of the interesting findings here is and this is where being able to compare to all the other disciplines is really
Yes.
interesting. One of the questions we asked is just, how are your enrollments looking?
Yeah.
And as you can see, the women and gender studies category was near the top end in terms of
Hmm.
departments saying their enrollments have either grown or held steady. It's surpassed only by classical studies, which is enjoying a bit of a rebound from
Yes.
a much bigger decline, but still
Uh-huh.
doing quite well and much better
Yeah.
than a lot of the big disciplines like history and communication, where they're seeing big drop offs in terms of
Hmm.
the number of majors. So
Hmm.
as part of this, I just wanted to mention another sort of bit of research we did with the National Student Clearinghouse, looking at the amount of movement between majors that we see. That from the time somebody
Hmm.
enters a major to the time they complete a degree, the humanities is really interesting, and the humanities and social sciences. So I think since your discipline
Yep.
kind of straddles
A lot.
both of them.
Uh-huh.
We
Uh-huh.
we are the only two fields in this list that has a net increase in the number of students who come in from the time for the time a student starts. About half of students will change majors before, and won't just change majors, but they'll switch
Right.
between fields, between
Right.
humanities, social sciences. And humanities and social sciences are the only two fields where there is a net increase in the number of students
Wow.
studying in those subjects between the
Wow.
time they start and the time they finish. All the other fields that you see on the left there are
Uh-huh.
losing majors. Either they're dropping out or they're changing to another subject area. But the net effect of that is that more than half of the students who are completing humanities degrees and social science degrees started in another field. It could be
Right.
general liberal arts or
Right.
undeclared, but
Right. Right.
yeah. And so that's, I think, an important part of, like one of the questions that we ask is, what are you doing to try and attract students? And this is part of the
Exactly.
reason for asking that. One of the other
Yeah.
elements that we came out of this study is the finding that the cultural, ethnic, gender studies category. We had to, since they were small enough, we had to lump them together for this purpose. But you can see that about 57% of the students who started in that subject stayed the subject. So doing
Mm-hmm.
slightly better than a lot of the other disciplines, 57%,
Mm-hmm.
but a little bit less than some of the biggest humanities
Right.
disciplines in terms of retention. And what's interesting here is that the students who leave were most likely to leave not just the humanities, but they're likely to leave the field as a whole. So 32% of those students.
Okay.
So a lot of them, in case your discipline, are probably going into another
Mm-hmm.
social science discipline. But it shows that there's a lot of movement across fields from this field, but still retaining a lot of
Yeah.
those students.
Yeah.
And so then turning to this question of like what departments are doing, you can see women and gender
Right.
studies are doing a lot. So there
Yeah.
are the green bars, the orange
Yeah.
bars are the average for all the fields that we surveyed. You see,
Yeah.
the women and gender studies programs are doing a lot to try and attract students. The more than 80% of them
Mm-hmm.
are trying to just do some sort of outreach to
Some
students who
sort
are
of
in other
outreach, right?
majors. Yeah, and you've got and which is more than most of the average for most of
Mm-hmm.
those
Mm-hmm.
fields, and they're more likely to be doing
Mm-hmm.
classes or other activities to try and talk about careers and jobs
Mm-hmm.
and those sorts of things. But you can see towards the bottom there are a bunch of things that the field is not doing. At the bottom,
Right.
one of the more interesting ones is the outreach to students in community colleges.
Yes.
And religion was the only one where
I know. I was going to
yeah,
say, I will never forget, and I have said this to anybody who will listen, that when we were in DC discussing the preliminary report in October, I just never got over. I told the religion department faculty here that it was so
yeah,
impressive to me that of all the humanities fields as you define them, religion was doing the most outreach to students in community colleges. And believe it or not, as someone who's taught in community colleges, I hadn't even
yeah,
thought of it. Hadn't even
yeah.
thought of it. So
Well,
yeah.
and I think, one of the things that came out of the study we did with the clearinghouse, I think I had kind of assumed that kids were going to community college so they could get out of having to study the humanities at the 4-year level. So kids were transferring. But what we
Ah,
found with the clearinghouse study was that actually the students who went to community college were almost like 50% more likely to go into the humanities than students who were just coming in cold straight from high school. So I do think,
see, that's important to know because it
yeah,
it at least gives us some motivation to take that that recruitment space seriously, maybe more
exactly.
seriously than
So
some of us have.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, so it is actually more. So it appears to be more promising, I think, as an area of opportunity. So that's just
Yeah.
one thing I'd like to point out in this. One
Yes.
of the other questions that we'd asked, and this was the
Yes.
first time we asked this, was just how departments feel about the future of the discipline. And you could see
Mhm.
women and gender studies was kind of at the low end, and this is at the future of the discipline at their institutions.
Right.
And you can see that 40%
Right.
of the department chairs said, only 40% said they were optimistic.
Yep.
And more than a third indicated that they were pessimistic about the future of the discipline. And I think one of the issues that I'd been thinking about was this question about academic freedom. And so you could see one of
Right.
the questions that came out was, it was really striking, was almost half of the studies programs, race and ethnic studies and women and gender studies, those
Mm-hmm.
chairs said they were concerned about academic freedom. And this was as of June of last year. So this is not post-election.
Exactly.
This is before the election. Um,
Exactly.
and they clearly stand out from all the other disciplines that were in the survey. So clearly a lot of concern even before we got ourselves into the current political
Exactly.
predicament that we're in
Exactly.
today. And what was also
Yes.
interesting was, and you can see that it was already the women, gender, and sexuality studies were already concerned about the federal government more so than, I mean, it was one of the few disciplines where that federal or state government was at the top in terms of the concerns among the chairs that expressed a concern, although academic administration was right up there with them.
Right up there
Um,
with it. Exactly.
yeah, but notably, students. You can see at the bottom, students among all humanities fields, students were much bigger concern than they were in your discipline, which I find kind of fascinating too.
Me
That
too.
is not as big a concern. So, and the
Me
public
too.
too, kind of in the middle there.
I
So,
was looking at that too. Faculty in other departments, I know it's not one of the highest concerns here, but
yeah,
I I was um I was glad you all included that. I don't know if I would have thought to, even though that's been something I've experienced personally,
yeah,
and to see it there, it's just a reminder that, you know, that's a factor too in our
yeah.
professional experiences, is the way that we're sort of situated on our campuses and the way we sometimes situate ourselves.
Yeah, no, we did some focus groups with department chairs when we were making up the survey, and they were the ones that insisted that we add that because they were like,
Smart.
some of the faculty in the philosophy department will actually
Yeah, it's
they're
smart.
they're the quickest to say, hey, we want you off our campus. So
It's
it's
so smart to have included that. I'm glad they did. I'm glad they
yeah,
did. And it's heartwarming to see that students aren't as much of a concern for the people who responded to the survey. You know, I think that's an interesting place for people to think about.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then really the last data point I just wanted to share was going
Okay.
back to that question about the disciplines, the future of the disciplines. You can see it's the top graph is all the fields, and the um, bottom graph is the women, gender, and sexuality
Right.
studies. And but broken out by Carnegie types to give us a better sense of like which institutions are the most worried about the future. And you can see that among all disciplines and for women, gender, and sexuality studies, it's the comprehensive institutions, the masters. So your public, often your
Yeah.
sort of public regionals, those sorts
Mm-hmm.
of institutions.
Mm-hmm.
Those are
Mm-hmm.
the ones where, as you can see, half of those department chairs in women and gender studies uh, were among the most pessimistic, and they're either the most likely to say they were very pessimistic or at least somewhat pessimistic. That
Yeah.
is really stands out compared to the primarily research universe, where you can see
Absolutely.
nobody was very pessimistic. It's just, but still, almost a third were at least pessimistic about
Right.
the discipline. So, and again, this
Yeah.
is in June. This is as in June of last year, and asking them to kind of look back over the previous
Exactly.
couple of years. So that would be the last thing to share with you.
Oh, thank you so much. And there's that contact
Oh, the pleasure.
information that
Oh yeah, yeah.
everybody will get in the links that we'll put in the descriptions of the video and everything else. Oh, thank you so much for at least giving us an overview of
Yeah.
the survey and the report. A couple things that I was also excited about, and I was hoping that you might say a little bit about what you were seeing across the different departments, is that there were no tenure denials in women's gender
Hmm.
and sexuality studies across the 2021-22 academic year and also the 2022-23 one. Now, to be clear, I think it was 30 folks left prior
Yeah.
to the decision, and I'm not sure how that impacts the data, but yeah, that was really, I mean, I remember even hearing you talk about that when we were in DC, and I thought, I'm not sure what my colleagues might want to do with that, but that just seems like something that we should not overlook. What are some of the thoughts you have about that data point? Is there anything you want to qualify about that or clarify about that?
Yeah, I gotta say that's probably the data point that I've had more pushback on, because people are like,
Really?
I
I
can't
can't
believe that
believe it.
that nobody was denied tenure. And I've been doing this survey. I started doing these sorts of studies for the American Historical Association back in the
Right.
'90s, and I remember the first time I saw this in the history data, and I was like, how can this be that like nobody gets denied tenure? Because like the first article I wrote as an undergraduate for my student newspaper was about a tenure denial. And so I just thought it was much more common. But then the more and I kept doing this survey, I kept finding the same thing in history. And then finally somebody, and I started asking around, and people would say, well, of course, if somebody's not going to get tenure, we just don't let them go forward for tenure. I mean, we
Right.
most folks tend to know if,
Yeah.
what the
Yeah.
outcome is
Yeah.
going to be. So
Yeah.
it's kind of
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
your dissertation defense. Like no good
Right.
dissertation
Right.
committee is going to let you defend if
Yeah, I
they're
hear
out to,
you. I
you know,
hear you. That makes sense. And so if people were curious, the leaving prior to decision making might be of interest to those of us in the
yes,
field who are looking to explore that a little bit further. And also, perhaps there is something to be said too about the ways that some of us, looks like a good majority of us, are being supported to and through tenure as well. So I
yeah.
think it's probably a little bit of both. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Um, I am wondering now about, I mean, I should have asked this first, but I wanted to start out with something like, okay, this, I'm sorry, is a little piece of good news, right? But the survey response rate, what are some of your thoughts about that in relation to our field? And would you, I mean, I'm sure you would always advocate for more of us to participate in these kinds of initiatives. But what are some of your thoughts about our particular response rate? And what are some things you've done to encourage, if at all, folks to be more responsive?
Oh, I mean, for this, I mean, for your discipline, we had a 44% response rate, which was
Right.
actually pretty good. I mean, and relatively, I think some of the larger disciplines were
Yeah.
lower. And I think sort of two things tend to lower the response rate. One
Hmm.
is that I hear back from a lot of department chairs just say, you know, I don't have any support staff anymore. Like, I just don't have time to fill this out and to answer all these
Right.
questions. One of the other challenges especially with the disciplines that are kind of on the cusp of a couple fields is,
Right.
I've had some department chairs, and this time I was much more careful about not saying this is a survey of humanities departments. I said, because when I did this the last time 5 years ago, especially the studies departments were like,
Oh yeah.
oh, hey, don't use the word humanities near me. It's like,
Like,
they
I'm not
were,
a humanist. I've said it before.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
So
am one though, but I'm also, yeah, a lot of
yeah.
us are social scientists, but a lot of us, don't feel as if we've sort of maintained our commitments to humanistic ways of doing research. And so it feels a little uncomfortable to say I'm a humanist for some of us,
Yeah.
but that might explain some of it too. I think you're right. Yeah. I'm
But I
wondering,
mean, like I said, it's pretty
yeah,
good. And then and then we worked with our partner at American Institute of Physics.
right,
They they did the math to make sure that the statistics kind of lined up so that we get good nationally normed
right,
data, and
good.
and then and also sort of called out where there might be gaps or questions. And so you'll see, I think,
Yeah,
in some of the data
yeah,
tables, if you look at that, there'll be like a D just to say there was just too much variation for us
yeah,
to see. But in most cases,
yeah,
there was enough similarity between the departments,
yeah,
especially in a discipline like yours has more
right,
kind of our research. It tends to be more
right,
prevalent at research universities than at smaller institutions,
right,
um, and to be more likely to be granting degrees than some of the others.
right.
So that sort of thing, I think, helped to
Yeah, yeah.
sort of make the math a lot easier on
Oh,
those calculations.
good. Yeah, yeah. Speaking of, how did you all, if at all, treat merged departments and programs that have become, women's and ethnic studies or critical identity studies? How do you go about those? Because we've got some folks in here, obviously, who are in those kinds of departments and programs,
Yep.
but who are also concerned about whether or not they will be merged, whether they want to or not. So I'm curious about that right now for these
Well,
reasons.
and that's become a much bigger problem for us. So
Yeah,
the way the survey's
yeah.
framed is it specifies it to so it says to the department chair, we want to know about the faculty teaching women, gender, and
In,
sexuality studies.
right.
We want to know about the students who are in women,
In,
gender,
yeah,
and sexuality classes. And so it's very specific about the program or the
yeah,
discipline that we're asking about, because we do have a substantial number of departments that
yeah,
are that have that. And so it's part of the reason in the tables, you can distinguish between
yeah.
those departments that are awarding, you can look at the departments by highest degree or
Right.
institution type, so you can get a better sense of
Yeah.
oh, we're at a private college and we're not awarding degrees
Right,
or our highest degree is a bachelor's degree like that. That'll give
right.
you a better sense to triangulate on what the kind of normal to benchmark your department against the
Yeah,
other departments that are most similar to you.
that makes sense. That makes sense. I there, I was really glad to see that. I'm gonna look at the question I have. One of the questions I have for you, make sure I'm on. Yeah, 90% of women's and gender studies departments claim to provide research support for their full-time tenured or tenure track faculty, which is
Mhm.
amazing. 71% offered such support for full-time but non-tenured faculty, but only 30-ish% offered support for part-time faculty. And the reason, non-tenure track part-time faculty, and
Yeah.
the reason that stuck out to me is because almost a quarter of the faculty in our field per this data are non-tenure track part-time faculty, which is up from 2017. So we have
Mhm.
more faculty in the field, our women's gender and sexuality studies, that are non-tenure track part-time. So I'm just wondering, as you've discussed these results across different departments and so on and so forth, have you learned about any initiatives that departments have developed and implemented to address this, especially those that lack material resources like a healthy operating budget? Because, of course, I want to say, let's all do more to support the research of our non-tenure track part-time faculty. And I've been in this field long enough to know that the response is going to be, with what resources? We're
Yeah.
overworked, we're underpaid, we are and all of these things make sense. And all of these things are reflective of our real experiences, but still, right. So has this come up across the humanities that you know of? And what have people been up to, if you know?
Not really. I mean, it's funny. This is
Ah,
a question. This is a question I started asking back in 1999, and I was struck by these things. And since I
yeah.
have served as an adjunct, so I know from this feeling. Although I have to say, to me, as somebody who's worked as an adjunct just this past semester, like just having access to the university college and the college's databases
Right.
is like such a gift from that perspective. But the lack of support. Uh, the, what's interesting with your discipline is just that the gap between
I
the
know.
tenured and the full time faculty and the part time faculty. In most cases, it's more up around 50%, if I remember right, in terms of the percentage of supporting their part time faculty. And given the
Yes.
kind of the large number or percentage of departments that are at R1s that are research institutions, that is kind of surprising that
Yeah.
the adjuncts aren't getting more support. But it's
Yeah.
not
And
a subject
research
that the
support, right?
disciplines tend to like to. Yes, exactly.
You know what I mean? And because I think that, I think one thing I think we can do in our field, those of us who are more experienced, who may be more privileged in particular ways. For instance, I'm at a well-endowed private college. So I have access to more resources than some of my colleagues at other kinds of places, right? I think we can talk more about this and think more about this. How can we in the National Women's Studies Association aid our colleagues in providing this kind of support? What are some, possibilities? And the National Women's Studies Association doesn't have our resources are our members, right? We don't have money, we don't have, but that doesn't mean we can't come together. Like I said, those of us who are more resourced and privileged, and think about how to support our folks. But okay, yeah, I figured when I asked the question that would be the response. But I wanted to make sure it was in this conversation so that
Yeah.
people could, see the data and hopefully be inspired to do some creative thinking around it, even though it's going to be very hard to provide this kind of support. But that doesn't mean that, I mean, we of all people will look at something hard and do it anyway. Otherwise, what are we here for? Okay, there's another thing I wanted to ask you about. And I remember so many of us in the meeting in October being alarmed at the data that was reflective of our field, and that's the tracking. So, three quarters per the survey data, right? Three quarters of women's studies, gender and sexuality studies do not track career outcomes for graduate students. What shook me was that we're the highest, right? Like 75% is the biggest amount that doesn't track. Next to us is musicology, but at 54%. So almost half of their departments do some tracking, whereas only a quarter of ours do. Can you talk about why tracking is something that we might want to consider putting a little bit more attention and resources to, even though we realize that it's difficult to do and all sorts of things, right? Like I don't want to get, and this is more for those of us watching, Rob, not so much you, but I don't like to get caught up in the what's hard to do and impossible to do. That's
Yeah.
like, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
a feminist, so I'm like, you tell me what's impossible and I'll show you we can do it. Why does anybody even track, and why should we consider? I mean, because we're already not tracking, so we don't need an argument for why not to track. What are some arguments that you might make for why we should at least consider it? And what have other people done to beef it
Yeah.
up, if you know of anything?
I mean, I'll be honest. A lot of the other scholarly societies
Yeah.
looked at the higher numbers and they're like, we don't believe our departments actually do that, or at least they don't do it in any systematic way. So it could just be
Really?
that your discipline is the
It
most
tells the truth.
honest, yeah, of the disciplines. So there's
See,
that.
that's why I
But
wanted to talk to you.
yeah, yeah. So but I mean, the reason for doing it, I
Yeah,
mean, it's
right.
actually incredibly valuable for. I think I'm struck at how. I mean, frankly, my undergraduate and where I got a master's degree
Yeah.
department just got in touch with me for the first time in like 30 years a couple years ago
Wow.
and invited me to come back and talk to their students about what my career was, how I got into those sorts of those sort of learning opportunities. I think can be incredibly valuable for our graduate students and our undergraduate students, frankly, just to
Yeah.
have some examples of somebody who's taken
Yeah.
that degree and done something with it. And actually, it also then provides an opportunity to sort of have some exchange as to learn about what our process is as teachers and those sorts of questions, so that we can do a better job, I think, of helping prepare them for
Yeah.
the careers that they're going to have. So to me,
Yeah.
that is the best reason for wanting to keep track of that. Plus, it serves as, I don't know, I think, especially given the state of the job market for a lot of us, it's obviously there's some desire perhaps not to know some of these questions, but I still feel like
That's when we should know, is when we don't want to know and it makes sense not to
yeah,
know, is when it's like that's when we need to know. Rob, I'm telling you that's always been important to me, keeping in touch with alumni and what are they doing and spotlighting them and doing little interviews with them after they've been out of school for some time. And one of the things that I'll add that's particular, I think, to women's gender and sexuality studies, but not entirely exceptional, is people don't know what to do with a degree in our field a lot of times, still to this day. Everybody
mhm,
assumes professor, so that's already there, right? Or nonprofit, right? Every time
mhm,
I tell people that I think feminist and gender studies at Colorado College has probably put 10 students in law school, undergrad, in the
hmm,
past 10 years, and people are like, what? I'm like, well, yeah. Like
yeah,
and I think that's one of the reasons why our department, I would have to look a little bit more closely, and I haven't shared in a while, so I'm a little more distant from our data. But I think that's why we've been able to maintain a racially diverse student body, in addition to
mhm,
having all faculty of color, right? So they look at us already and they see something.
right,
But I think it's because we never shied away from talking about their futures and talking about practicality, and a lot of us, I mean, some of the data shows how much this field is committed to praxis, right? Like you see it in
yeah,
our report. So it's not to say that my department is the only one doing it, but I just want people to also know that I think that being able to talk with our students about what their futures might look like is going to help with, you know, maintaining the kind of communities that we want to, that are as diverse as possible. And the reason I say that, Rob, is because one of the things that frustrated me so bad about this data, but I wasn't surprised, is that our chairs are still almost 90% white, 84%. And we have been talking about this in women's studies for since I was a child. You know what I mean? So I think that knowing that about our chairs and makes me, compels me to tell them that,
Yeah.
you know, there are things you can do that I think might help, with recruitment and with diversifying and with, co-creating a department or program that is what our world is. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Or what we want it to be. So I don't know if they want to call it tracking or whatever, but just keeping in touch,
Yeah.
and letting your students now see what your alumni are up to is amazing. I love to do it. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say, the first time I started to do a separate kind of talk aimed specifically at undergraduate students, where I talk
Yeah.
about the skills they're developing and just about what the
Yeah.
what the career sectors are, where people with their degrees, with humanities
I
degrees,
love
end
it.
up, and show that, and the fact that the earnings of our alumni look very much like every other college graduate. So both to try and dispel their fears and to give them some sense of guidance. And I have to say, one of the weirder things that happened the last time I gave one of these talks with alumni in the room
Yeah.
was that I had a bunch of alumni come up to me afterwards and say, after listening to them describe these amazing jobs that they had, coming up to me afterwards and saying, I've never felt more validated about getting my degree in history. And
I
I was
believe
like,
it.
why would you not? I mean, like, where did you think you developed all these skills? And they're like, I just always thought I was just learning about like 19th century German intellectual
I
history. I
believe
never
it.
thought about the skills that I was
Fair.
developing and how like
Yeah.
I would use those. And so that's part of the
Yeah.
reason I started to do this other talk, because I feel like we need to help them understand that we're not just pouring content into their head, we're
Right.
helping them, like all these assignments we're giving them are actually helping them develop skills that are actually going to be valuable and will
And
actually
that's
help them
important.
get where they want to go.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I'm back in the day, as are you, where the FAFSA had an EFC, expected family contribution. My family's was zero. So I was not, likely to want to pursue a major where the faculty refused or were unable or unwilling to talk to me about how I could take care of myself. And if that, and we go through this in the liberal arts a lot, where a lot of us at liberal arts institutions really struggle, with that worry that focusing on practicality and money matters will sort of dilute the,
yeah,
it's like an
it makes us
impurity.
dirty, makes us dirty.
Yeah, it makes
Yeah,
us dirty. And
yeah,
I'm like, well, then I would love that. I think that's what I'm
yeah.
aiming for, is to dirty it up and so that it's just more reflective of the actual world we're living in. But okay, yeah, I really wanted to get that in there. I have another thing that I wanted to ask you about. Enrollment in our graduate level courses is down between 18 and 20%, which isn't entirely different from other
Mhm.
humanities department survey. I looked, but graduate student enrollments are up for art history, linguistics, philosophy. What are some of the, how might you explain that, if you could at
I mean,
all, if you had a
in in
theory?
in a couple of in the case of art history and philosophy, it's that their
Yeah.
numbers went down farther and faster than it did for you all. And so part of it is I
Okay.
think they're having more of a rebound. So
Okay.
yeah, so I mean, part of the problem is you're looking at two comparison between two snapshots, and
Right.
all of
Right.
these things are sorts of flows. Linguistics is just seems to be enjoying this big resurgence, and
I
so
love
they're
it.
actually they've been on a long upward trend at this point,
I love it.
and so they're just doing good overall from that
I love
perspective. So
linguistics. I love linguistics. I used to be an English major and I did my
oh
master's in
yeah,
English as well. Oh yeah. And see, that's the thing, and being in women's studies, but also my PhD is in American studies. So that's home for me too. But also there, and even in Black studies, where a lot of my work is situated, I can't really talk shit about anybody because they're all here.
yeah.
I
Well,
talk shit about philosophy. There are philosophy people here, But no, our field is comprised of everybody almost, right?
right.
So we have linguistics who do feminist analyses of, so I'm proud of them. I'm happy for them. And I'm just always eager to learn from people who are doing things well, even if it's not, directly applicable. And, we compare American studies and women's studies a lot, and we probably shouldn't, because they're very different, but they're so similar that it's hard not to do. but I just say, it might not directly apply, but that doesn't mean I don't want to hear about it. Like I want to
Yeah.
hear like, how are they doing well? I'm like, man, that's amazing. So I'm wondering too, as we wrap up and because we're not going to cover every single point and we're just, trying to give people an opportunity to get excited about what they might find there and how they might leverage it. Just in closing, what what's the most exciting thing you've heard as you've been sort of touring this data, right? Touring this
Yeah.
report, concerning how people have used it, leveraged it. Like what's made you sort of say, yes, okay, this is what we're doing it for, and you know, let's
Yeah.
stay at it.
I mean, to me, the most exciting is when, I've seen departments that, and I guess these are the data points I didn't share, but
Right.
the sort of the average number of students enrolled, the number of majors, the number of
Yeah.
faculty, the mix of, full and part-time faculty. Like I've seen a number of departments that have taken that data and then gone to their development office and said, look, we don't have, we are X number of faculty or X number of students off from the national average. And they've actually been successful in then fundraising off that for student scholarships, for faculty
Yeah.
endowments and those sorts of things. And so it is, to me, I don't know. Some people like, oh, we don't want to hear the bad news from you, Rob. And I'm like, but sometimes the bad news can be an opportunity to say, like, we got a
Yeah.
problem here and we need to fix it. And so I feel like that to me is when I see people being creative like that, taking the opportunity, looking for those leverage points. That's to me what I think is pretty exciting as ways of doing these things. So,
Well,
and the things like the community college stuff where it's like, oh no, there's another opportunity for us to maybe be reaching out. Talk to our
that's
colleagues.
yeah,
Yeah,
you took the words right of my mouth, right out of my
yeah,
mouth. Like that's something that I hope that, to the extent folks are willing and able, that's one of the things that I hope folks get excited about because I mean, it's time, sure, it's labor, sure, and go up there if you can and buy some pizzas and talk to some
yeah,
folks, about women's studies. I think it would be amazing, and I think it would be, really, important to look those students in the eyes and tell them that you think that that's something that they might be excited about. I know I wouldn't have become a professor probably unless if my professor didn't look at me and say that she thought I could be one. And that's why I went to grad school, is because somebody
yeah.
looked at me and said, you'd be great. And I said, what, me? Okay. Um, and I also wanted to say, a lot of us in women's studies, and it's understandable, you saw the pessimism, optimism discourse, and it's hard to stay excited. It's hard to stay motivated, especially in the current political climate we're in. And I will also um, if I could close with my ancestor, our ancestor, Ida B. Wells Barnett, okay, she published Lynch Law in America, one of my favorite articles of all time in 1900. The Emmett Till, excuse me, wait, no, the first anti-lynching act was not passed. The Dyer anti-lynching bill, that's what it was. I had to double check
Mhm.
until 1922.
Yeah,
So, should she have not written the article because it didn't immediately change? Or did her writing the article potentially impact the change? So, I think for a lot of us, I hope that we can, build on what you said, right? Look at the data, see how we can maximize it, try. Doesn't mean we're going to get 5 new faculty. It doesn't mean we're going to, but if we don't do that, I'm not sure if we will either. So I'm just hoping people see this as a starting point,
yeah,
something they can use. My department went from 1 faculty member to 4, and I did use data, when I was advocating with others to get those lines. So it doesn't always work, but when it does, it doesn't hurt to have a little data to go with it.
yeah.
So thank you so much for this work. I hope that you continue to be able to invite the National Women's Studies Association to participate in any forthcoming events and studies that you're doing. We switch presidents every 2 years. My term is up in just over 3 months. So we'll see who the next president is, but our executive director is always looking for opportunities to stay abreast of what's going on, not just in our field, but in others. She goes to ALS. ALS was in DC too. So just, yeah, thank you, Rob, for paying such attention to us and, encouraging us to be a part of the conversations you're having.
No. I mean, I think it's part of. I keep pointing to the studies fields as where we're seeing our growth, our opportunity. Where some of the vitality is happening, as compared to some of the older disciplines that they're they're sort of struggling, and they're dropping a lot faster than you all in terms of majors. So you're doing a better job there as well. So.
All right. Well, I'm going to take that. I'm going to take that. I'll take it. I'll take